morning and welcome to Rising. We've got a great show for you today, lots of news to get to. I'm Robby Soave, filling in for Amber Duke, and filling in on the other side of the table is Stephen Olikara, a political commentator. Nice to see you.
Thanks for having me. Excited to be on this side of the table.
Yes, very fun. Lots to get to today, especially this big news. It is official. Robert F. Kennedy Jr., who made his own run for this year for president as an independent, was selected by the president-elect Donald Trump to head Health and Human Services. RFK Jr. has long been an advocate for what he calls Make America Healthy Again. Let's watch.
This is what most Americans innocently put into their bodies these days, and most alarmingly, into the bodies of their children. And it's no coincidence that Americans die earlier than Canadians or Germans or Italians or Japanese or Koreans or Australians or most any other comparable country. And it wasn't always that way. Until the early 1990s, our life expectancy was the same or better than other developed countries. Then suddenly, more and more Americans began suffering from chronic diseases, from obesity, cancer, diabetes, kidney disease, Alzheimer's, heart disease, and all kinds of autoimmune diseases. Our maternal mortality rate soared to the highest of any developed country on earth. Same with infant mortality. Like the frog in the slowly boiling water, we didn't really notice as we got sicker and sicker. We've grown now to accept chronic disease conditions as normal. But now, in 2024, we're finally waking up to this cataclysm, and we're asking ourselves, how in the world did this happen?
In a statement following Thursday's announcement, Kennedy said he's eager to work with HHS employees to rid public health agencies of corporate capture and clean up corruption. Now, if confirmed, RFK Jr. would oversee the labyrinth of 13 health agencies with a nearly $2 billion budget. These agencies include the National Institutes of Health, led by formerly Anthony Fauci. RFK Jr. has promised to cut the agencies of bloat, come down hard on the Food and Drug Administration.
Many of RFK Jr.'s beliefs cut against the mainstream, and he's definitely a polarizing figure. For example, Kennedy has promoted false claims about vaccinations for years and founded the nonprofit Children's Health Defense, which promotes anti-vaccine material, such as the recent documentary Vax 3, Authorized to Kill. RFK Jr. has embraced a slew of other debunked health-related conspiracy theories, including coming out against low doses of fluoride in water, saying it can cause brain damage. The American Dental Association calls fluoridated water the single most effective public health measure to prevent tooth decay. RFK also wants to cut the nation's obesity rates and its reliance on processed foods.
Now, reaction has been fierce from all sides of the political spectrum. President Trump wrote on X, "For too long, Americans have been crushed by the industrial food complex and drug companies who have engaged in deception, misinformation, and disinformation when it comes to public health. Mr. Kennedy will restore these agencies to the traditions of gold standard scientific research and beacons of transparency to end the chronic disease epidemic and to make America great and healthy again."
Public Citizen, a progressive nonprofit organization focusing on consumer advocacy, said Robert F. Kennedy is a clear and present danger to the nation's health. He shouldn't be allowed in the building at the Department of Health and Human Services, let alone be placed in charge of the nation's public health agency. Trump is courting another policy-driven public health catastrophe, the organization added. Congressman Robert Garcia wrote, "The RFK as health secretary appointment is effing insane. He's a vaccine denier and a tinfoil hat conspiracy theorist. He will destroy our public health infrastructure and our vaccine distribution systems. This is going to cost lives."
Now, while news of the nomination has drawn plenty of criticism from Democrats, one prominent Dem departed from this reflexive anti-RFK Jr. orthodoxy. That's Colorado Governor Jared Polis, who wrote on X, "I'm excited by the news that the president-elect will appoint RFK Jr. to HHS. He helped us defeat vaccine mandates in Colorado in 2019, and he'll help make America healthy again by shaking up HHS and FDA. I hope he leans into personal choice on vaccines rather than bans, which I think are terrible, just like mandates. But what I'm most optimistic about is taking on Big Pharma and the corporate AG oligopoly to improve our health." So, here we are, RFK Jr. joining the Trump administration if he is confirmed or if they start doing recess appointments. It's part of a slew of nominations that have taken place this week, including Tulsi Gabbard, Matt Gaetz, Pete Hegseth, Kristi Noem, and others. Look, I have been grateful for the spotlight RFK Jr. has shown on censorship on social media, the purging of dissident perspectives on COVID. Like RFK Jr., I don't think the COVID vaccines should be mandated. I was totally opposed to President Biden's vaccine mandate for federal workers. That said, I do depart from RFK Jr. on a lot of regulatory topics, and I like Jared Polis. I really appreciated what he said there. I think we should get to the bottom of corruption in the pharmaceutical industry and in the health sector. You know, the fact that the dentist associations think fluoride water is safe, whatever, that might be correct, but they also might have a financial incentive to say that. So let's just, let's not outsource policy to industries that want to engage in regulatory capture. That said, if his tenure is about making it more difficult for people to buy food or putting more restrictions on food or medicine, I would not count that personally as a success.
Look, I know a lot of public health experts are speaking out about this, and I also noticeably saw the Pfizer stock dropped yesterday upon this appointment.
Oh no, not that.
And so I think you're reading some interesting tea leaves here. I think that there are too many additives in our food. One of the first causes I took on as a student was trying to get healthy foods into schools for children, and I saw firsthand how big ag and a lot of these food distribution companies completely have a monopoly on certain regions of our country. And also on top of that, they're not feeding the healthiest stuff. So there is a lot of corruption. RFK Jr. talks about the corporate capture of our federal agencies, and that's definitely true for HHS, and within that, there's the FDA, CDC, and other agencies. So that's the part I'm excited about. I think this makes it probably the most exciting or interesting cabinet appointment pick that Trump has made. But on the other hand, RFK Jr. does have some far out there ideas. The fluoride thing, I'm not an expert in fluoride, but we'll see where that one lands. The discussion around vaccines, there's a way he can frame that can hopefully be less threatening to people, that focuses more, as Governor Polis said, on choice as opposed to banning vaccines outright. And the thing I've learned working in politics is that the interests around food and agriculture are extremely powerful. That's why we have so much high fructose corn syrup in our food, for example. And so if RFK can push back on that, I think it's a positive development.
I always say to people who are like, the food has different, safer, and healthier ingredients, and the drugs are cheaper and all that stuff in every other country. My answer to that is always, well, can we just import it from the other countries then? And there are massive restrictions, government restrictions on doing that. You cannot buy medicine from other countries. I'm like, well, if it's cheaper there, we'll just get, Amazon has mastered the art of having things show up on my doorstep the next day. So maybe if there are regulations that prevent people from getting access to better, higher quality food and cheaper medicine, we can work on relaxing some of those instead of creating more bureaucracies or more layers of difficulty to come between people and their choices. Because I do think it's important to give people choice, and that's been taken away from them by both administrations. With the vaccines, taking that choice away from people was, I think, a very bad idea. But yeah, like you said, I don't want to make it more difficult for people who want vaccines, as many boosters as they want. That's your choice. Your health is about you. And that's what I hope that RFK Jr. will manifest in this role.
Well, and I think you're right. Both RFK Jr. and Governor Polis spoke about on the leveling the playing field for drugs to be able to import drugs from across international lines. That will have a huge impact on consumers getting lower cost drugs. But there is another element here that I think needs to be talked about more, which is the politics of health. Mm-hmm. So far, eating healthy food and getting additives out of our food system has been mostly talked about on the left. And in fact, Michelle Obama's main initiative as First Lady was Let's Move and Let's Get Healthier Foods to Kids. That initiative exists today as a nonprofit called Partnership for a Healthier America. Great organization. For RFK Jr. to bring this issue to the political right, I think is a game changer. I've always believed that RFK Jr. was essentially the Andrew Yang of 2024, and that he brought a new issue to the national stage and is transforming the politics of an issue. So I think that's really important. Do I agree with every position that RFK Jr. has? No. But do you need a radical change agent to shake up some of these agencies, including HHS? Yes.
Well, we've got a lot more to talk about on Rising today. Please stay with us. Much more to come.
Elect and former president and Donald, congratulations. Thank you. And looking forward to having like we said, a smooth transition. Do everything we can to make sure you're accommodated, what you need. And we're going to get a chance to talk about some of that today. So
Good.
Welcome
Thank you
back.
very much. And thank you very much. And politics is tough, and it's many cases not a very nice world, but it is a nice world today, and I appreciate it very much. And a transition that's so smooth, it'll be as smooth as it can get, and I very much appreciate that, Jim.
You're welcome.
When President-elect Donald Trump and President Joe Biden met at the Oval Office on Wednesday, it was all very, very genteel and affable. The two even shook hands. President Biden called for a peaceful transition of power.
Not everyone was happy about this, however. Some, like Charlamagne Tha God, even went as far as saying this was a betrayal of democratic values.
I just don't understand the White House visit. Now, granted, I'm glad it's a peaceful transition of power, but what happened to the threat of democracy talk? What happened to the fascist talk? By the way, I know I've said those things about Trump as well, but I'm not talking about me. I'm talking about his political opponents like President Biden. When they say it, it holds way more weight than me. I'm just trying to figure out, how do you go from he's an existential threat to democracy to welcome back?
He was happy too. He was happy. He was smiling. He was grinning. He was cheesing. Say cheese. He was cheesing, bro.
I'm just trying to figure out how. I understand President Biden believes in political norms, but damn.
Yeah, I think the response to Charlamagne Tha God there is that talk, the existential threat to democracy, fascist talk, was somewhat overblown. Even if I'm, being maximally charitable to that position, that Donald Trump is a little bit outside normal characteristics in terms of how he handled elections, but that a lot of the people using that rhetoric didn't actually believe it, and they got utterly thumped in the election and are now, to their credit, I think this is a good thing that Biden is being very respectful and magnanimous and talked about the importance of doing a transition of power. That's something Donald Trump should have done last time. It was not to his credit that he didn't. It actually hurt his own political ambitions, at least briefly, that he treated it that way. But it was nice to see. I'm happy to see both Biden and Trump handling this transition in a respectful of each other manner. Trump does seem to be gracious, at least in victory, not in defeat. But there was no laying it on thicker or using that moment to score more points. He wanted to kind of paper over things, is what it seemed like to me.
Well, the peaceful transition of power, very important. So I'm happy to see Biden and Harris helping to facilitate that. But I love Charlamagne Tha God. I think this is so funny because what he is doing is peeling back the curtain slightly on what's really going on. He's essentially calling out the game. And what he's saying is, you're either BSing us then, or you're BSing us now. If you're saying that Trump is Hitler, Nazi, fascist, how are you now chumming it up in the White House and saying everything's going to be okay? So, yes, I think this is very important. I feel a calling right now to share this with people, that the rhetoric in campaigns gets overblown. It's one reason why I find when I'm talking with my friends, I enjoy political debates because I understand how the rhetoric is formed and how it's communicated. But for most of my friends, they get a lot of heartburn from watching political debates. They hate seeing things like a fascist rising to power. And I think that people need to know that a lot of these messages are intentionally designed to divide us against each other for two reasons. It extracts dollars and it generates views for what they're doing. And I think that politicians need to be a lot more responsible about their rhetoric. Absolutely.
Not just politicians, members of the media as
Yes,
well, because frankly, some of the most over-the-top, hyperbolic rhetoric was not even coming from the campaign itself. It was coming from media, allies and surrogates in the mainstream and in progressive media. And of course, there's extreme rhetoric in conservative media as well. Those are people I've seen on social media in many cases being like, but we said he's a fascist, and now they're just willingly giving up power to the fascists? You can't do that. Like, so then what are you? You're advocating counter or anti-democratic measures to keep the Democrats in power. Well, that's exactly what the Republicans did or Trump did, or you accuse them of doing. On some level, it just then becomes, well, an extreme elements of both sides are willing to countenance bad or extreme or anti-democratic measures to hang on to power, and that is actually not abnormal at all.
And this is one reason why trust is going down in politicians as well as in media. Trust is at an all-time low in media because the voters are wondering, do you really mean the words you're saying? I mean, go back to 2012, for example. Democrats said Mitt Romney was a huge threat.
I remember.
And,
now he's their hero now.
Yeah, exactly. And so that should just be an indication for the voters that whoever the villain is going to be, they're going to max out the outrage. Now, I do think, obviously, Trump is many steps further to the line of undermining democracy than Mitt Romney. Mitt Romney would have never incited an insurrection on the Capitol. So there are some real issues there. But I just think that Charlamagne is pointing out what's going on. I call it like seeing the Wizard of Oz. It's like if you go behind the curtain and you find out what's really happening. The viewers now are starting to see this gamesmanship that's really happening.
We're not in Kansas anymore. I think that was particularly true, not just of Mitt Romney. To watch Republicans be rehabilitated by Democrats and mainstream media solely for denouncing Trump, not for changing any of their other underlying positions. This is a little bit true of George W. Bush, who has been, I would say, mildly rehabilitated. And then it's very much true of the Cheney family, which has been massively and totally rehabilitated. Dick Cheney described as Darth Vader in stark authoritarian, evil terms. I was actually very critical of Dick Cheney throughout the Bush administration because the kind of interventionist, neoconservative bent of which he was the ideological master is not my ball of wax on the right at all. But now, because Liz Cheney, who's still an architect of, still a supporter of all sorts of, I would argue, ruinous foreign involvements, entanglements, and interventions. Now she was campaigning with Kamala alongside Kamala. There were talks of her being offered a job in the administration. She would have been the RFK Jr. figure of that administration, somebody from the other side who's welcomed in. And I found it so interesting. I did a monologue on this yesterday about the concerns among progressive staffers about Kamala going on Rogan, that was going to be offensive if she made an appearance on Joe Rogan to progressive staffers. I'm like, but progressive staffers you weren't afraid they'd be mad that you were palling around with Liz Cheney? It really goes to show some very misguided priorities, I think.
You can't go from Dick Cheney as Darth Vader and the architect of our worst foreign policy blunder, the Iraq invasion, in our lifetimes, and now trotting him out and almost like being proud to have that endorsement during a debate. It has to be more honest. Now, I believe in building wide coalitions,
sure,
a lot of people into your party, but it needs to be done authentically. Look at how Bernie Sanders, for example, does his endorsements of Biden or Harris. He says, we disagree on these issues, but we agree on these issues, and this is why I'm endorsing this person. They skipped over that step with Liz and Dick Cheney, and I think you're exactly right that you can't be more afraid of Joe Rogan than you're afraid of Liz Cheney and Dick Cheney's foreign policy. And by the way, that whole strategy didn't work. They did that endorsement in Ripon, Wisconsin, the birthplace of the Republican Party. Donald Trump increased his vote in Ripon, Wisconsin by 3 or 4 points. So, didn't work.
What a great strategy. All right, coming up next, are we headed for some recounts in some of those very close states? We'll take a look at that. Stay tuned. More Rising right after this. Democrats are holding on for dear life in the battleground state of Pennsylvania, and in Wisconsin, it's that situation for the Republicans. Almost 2 weeks post-Election Day, the tight Pennsylvania Senate race has triggered a recount. 99% of votes have been counted there, and despite Republican Senator-elect Dave McCormick ahead by more than 26,000 votes, incumbent Democratic Senator Bob Casey has not conceded. Decision Desk HQ called the race for McCormick, who got 48.9% of the vote, while Casey got 48.5%. Once the counties finish counting their ballots, they must begin the recount no later than November 20th, and it must be completed by noon on November 26th. Republicans asked the Pennsylvania Supreme Court on Thursday to ensure mail ballots with a missing or improper date are not counted. Looking toward the West, Wisconsin Republican Eric Hovde admitted earlier this week that he did in fact lose the state's Senate race to Democratic incumbent Tammy Baldwin, but he's refusing to concede so far and is considering launching a recount. While he's not yet confirmed if he will request a recount, he is allowed to because he lost by less than 1 percentage points at 29,000 votes. So I've not followed the situation in Wisconsin as closely, but Baldwin held on to the seat, and it doesn't look like any kind of recount could possibly change that.
Yeah, that's right. Eric Hovde put out a video highlighting his issues with the election. And what happens in Wisconsin is, in Milwaukee, there's usually a late dumping of absentee ballots that affects the vote. Obviously, that disproportionately benefits Democrats. So it looked like Hovde was winning for a lot of the night. Even at 1 a.m., it looked like he might be winning, but then at 4 a.m., it shifted in Baldwin's favor. And in his video, he highlighted some numbers that were just wrong. He said within those absentee ballots, 90% went to Baldwin. That's not true. Roughly about 80% went to Baldwin, which is roughly on track with what you would expect from the Milwaukee vote. So I don't expect this changing. What I do hope to happen, though, is that we have pre-counting of absentee ballots, so we don't have this late confusion as we're counting those votes. And going to Pennsylvania, just briefly, they may do a recount, and obviously candidates within a certain margin, subject to state rules, are allowed to ask for recounts, and that's totally fine. But I don't see either of those races changing.
Yeah, I don't either. And McCormick said that in a statement. He said, look, it's within the margin, and Casey is legally correct to call for a recount if he wants one, but we all know it's not going to change the outcome in either of these cases. They were both close. Michigan was kind of close. We had these number of swing states where Republicans did get a couple pickups. They did pretty well, and I think they're very happy. They could have really hit the ball out of the stadium with if they'd picked up the Baldwin seat and one in Michigan, but they didn't. Still a pretty good night overall for Republicans, so I don't think they're too upset about their Senate achievements, but that's the way it goes.
Yeah, and part of what happened in states like Wisconsin is Tammy Baldwin ran basically at the same level as Kamala Harris. They got almost identical numbers of votes. On the Republican side, there was a drop-off at the Senate level. So Trump, with his brand and his following, he upped his vote, and not enough Trump voters voted for Eric Hovde. And now there were some other candidates on the ballot. There was a Libertarian candidate and a so-called America First candidate that Eric Hovde is contending that Democrats put up those candidates. And obviously, if those two candidates, if their supporters voted for Hovde, he probably would have won. Mm-hmm. So I hope that Eric Hovde becomes a big supporter of ranked choice voting as a result of this election, because neither candidate got over 50%. If there was ranked choice voting, it's possible the result would have been different.
I am very, very much in support of ranked choice voting. I hope that takes off everywhere. It goes to show that the conventional wisdom about Trump, maybe it was right in the previous election cycles, it's totally wrong now that, if any other Republican would be more popular, would do better, he's so loathed by a part of the electorate that will never vote for him. If you just had a normal, respectable Republican, they'd do better. I believed that for a long while, but here you have him running ahead of the quote-unquote normal Republicans or whatever. He gets more votes than them. He's more popular than them. So it totally disproves that theory.
Right. And it's not just Wisconsin, it's Michigan.
No, over in every state.
Result.
Every single state, even in Pennsylvania, even in states where you did have the candidate prevail, Trump gets more votes.
Right. And then Nevada and Arizona. And it's just interesting to look at those because in addition to this Trump dynamic you're talking about, there are split-ticket voters out there.
Yeah, they still exist.
And they do still exist.
And they're splitting it in Trump's favor.
Yeah,
that was not the case in 2020.
Right.
In 2020, some of the Senate candidates ran ahead of Trump.
Yeah. And by the way, a version of this happened in Wisconsin in 2022, where we also had a split result. The Democratic governor, Tony Evers, won. The Republican Senator Ron Johnson won, and yes, there were Evers-Johnson voters. By the way, I'm going to reveal this for the first time. One of the ways that I've been undefeated in making political predictions is by seeing what happened in Wisconsin 2 years before. Mm-hmm. So I predicted that Trump would win, but Democrats would still win some of these key swing Senate races because a similar dynamic happened in Wisconsin. So For the first time here on the Hill, on Rising, I'm sharing that with the viewers.
Good. People should toot their own horn when they. I make all sorts of predictions all the time. Then I just go back and delete the ones on Twitter that didn't pan out. No, I'm not. I admitted when I go down to defeat in 2022, I expected a better outcome for Republicans than we got, and then I did narrowly think Kamala was going to eke it out, and that looks like a humiliating prediction, although it wasn't as humiliating as the prediction of my fellow co-host at that time who had Kamala not only winning, but winning Florida and Texas. That did not quite pan out. I was interested to see Kyrsten Sinema say that Casey and Gallego should be included in all the festivities for incoming senators, even though the other person hasn't conceded in those races. I agree with that. They are the winners. They are going to be the senators, even if it's, or for Tammy Baldwin, even if these recounts are going to occur, we know the results, what it is, and they should be included in the welcoming materials in D.C., don't you think?
Yeah, absolutely. Those orientations are really important. They've been happening this past week, and they help especially new senators get accustomed to how things actually operate. You know, for a lot of freshmen senators as well as representatives, there's a huge learning curve just to figure out how to set up your office, how to introduce legislation. But one thing that really...
You got to find housing in my neighborhood in Navy Yard or on Capitol Hill.
Exactly.
It's hard.
Some of them get housing, some of them have roommates, some of them sleep in the office, believe it or not, and use the congressional gym and showers. But the thing that needs to change with the orientations, though, that would make it more helpful for people is to have more interaction across party lines. A lot of the orientations are done completely separately, and so the members of Congress are not actually meeting each other and building relationships. And at the beginning of every new class, they usually say, all right, we're going to be the class that models civil discourse and we work on bipartisan legislation. And it's really tough because you get immediately segregated, and that practice needs to change. It's
like when none of the boys and none of the girls will talk to each other at the 6th grade dances, right?
It's
you got to mix it up. You got to do some icebreakers.
It's like middle school.
Yeah.
It is.
Go talk to a girl. That's my advice to members of Congress. More Rising coming up right after this. I'm not sure what we're talking about next. I'm going to look down and see if I can figure it out. Who will run the DNC? That's up next. It's official. It's a clean sweep for the GOP. The Republican Party now controls the House, the Senate, and of course the Oval Office. We have been talking a lot about the fallout among Democratic elites, how it all went so wrong for Kamala Harris. There have been two voices in the wilderness for almost a year.
We thought that Trump was going to win for months and months because it was obvious, where Joe Biden was a deeply unpopular, aging incumbent, thought it was asinine that the Democratic Party wasn't primarying him. And along came our guy, Dean Phillips, who was making that very, very case. And we said, you know what? Let's do this. And I have to say now, everyone is saying, oh, man, if Joe Biden had only gotten out sooner.
Correct.
And now it's like, where the were you in January when we were up in New Hampshire making this case? You were all probably penguin clapping, Joe's our guy.
That is Andrew Yang on his podcast Forward. Yang is a one-time tech entrepreneur who ran unsuccessful bids for mayor of New York and president of the United States in the 2020 cycle. Now, Congressman Dean Phillips of Minnesota has also been critical of the Democrats for more than a year. He was the first elected Democrat to break with party rank and file for calling for Biden not to run, or at least have a party primary.
Most Democrats know it. They've been feeling it. I think I'm the only one saying the quiet part out loud, Leland. I remember I think it was July of 2022, where I first said the president should pass the torch, cement his legacy. He did a fine job saving the country, I believe. And the only reason we're having these conversations right now is because he's running again. His next term would end in January of 2029. I don't think these conversations would be as significant if he had already decided to pass the torch, open the stage to a new generation, which is what he should have done. And it's sad to see.
Dean Phillips was treated horribly by his own party when he questioned Joe Biden in this most recent presidential cycle. I think he is owed a lot of apologies. The big question right now is who should lead the next generation of Democrats? And that is the decision that they're going to have to make. Like I just said, Dean Phillips was right. He was completely right. He was laughed at. He was scoffed at. They tried to humiliate him, and he was completely right.
He was. I mean, he called for a new generation of leadership, and the Democrats said we're not going to have a primary election. And a good example of what's going on right now was in the state of Florida. Dean Phillips, as well as Marianne Williamson and others who were running, wanted to be on the ballot. But instead, because the parties decide who would be on the Florida primary ballot, the Democrats only submitted Joe Biden's name. And as a result, there was only one candidate. State law says there won't be a primary. And so the Democratic Party canceled the primary election in the state of Florida. And a similar dynamic happened in other states, which Dean Phillips was referring to in that tweet. And so the key here is for the Democratic Party to be more democratic, to be able to hear from the voters. And that usually works out well. Like when you have a very competitive party primary, for example, in 2008, truly the strongest candidate emerges, like in that cycle, Barack Obama. So right now, the culture of the Democratic Party needs to change. This sort of top-down command and control structure is not serving people well, and it's not, importantly, it's not reading what the people want.
Yeah, the way the pro-Biden Democratic pundits approached this issue on TV was just incredible. They would say over and over again, no, he's the incumbent president, it is his, bend the knee now. That was their approach, even though there were signs back then that a majority of Americans, a majority of Democrats had questions about Joe Biden's, given his age, ability to serve a second term. That was well before the utter on-screen collapse of Joe Biden's prospects that validated the concerns voiced by people like Dean Phillips all along. So I agree with you. There should have just been a primary process. And then if he'd won it anyway, in a fair and open, if he'd done debates with these other candidates and won it like he won it fair and square in 2020, then you couldn't have said anything. And you said, well, he won it. Or if in that process it emerged that he was really slipping since last time, you might have had more of a time to have a different candidate arise, even a different candidate than Kamala Harris, perhaps, who did not end up being such a strong candidate. I mean, lost somewhat decisively. That could have all happened. On the Republican side, they tried to do this, by the way. They had an actual primary. It was not just handed to Trump this time. They tried to have an actual primary process. They had debates. He didn't attend them. He didn't care. He acted like it was just going to be his all along, and he did, in fact, win. But the party did try to have a normal nominating process where if someone can beat Trump, then it's going to be theirs. That didn't happen, but it was healthier for the party that they did it. And it ended up, the result was the party was more unified behind Trump than it has been in either of his two previous election cycles. But there was no dissent. He won. It was his. And he won his biggest victory yet.
The Democratic leadership lied to us. It's as simple as that. And for so long, you would hear Democrats talk about Republicans and the Trump dynamic where privately they would say one thing about Trump, like he's insane, he's crazy, and then they toe the party line publicly. The same thing happened on the Democratic side, right, where privately everyone would say Biden's not up to this, and then publicly they say he is. I was in a relatively small gathering with Joe Biden back in February, and it was clear to me at that time, this is not going to happen. Oof. And at that point, the truth was going to come out at some point in this process. It finally happened with the debate. But I was predicting, even in the spring, that Kamala Harris would be the nominee because I knew that you can't keep something like this secret for that long. And that's just not a service to Biden. It's not a service to the entire country. And I just think that there needs to be a real reckoning of what happened because, look, anyone who was in a room with Biden could see it. I could say personally as far back as February.
That is incredible because we were being gaslit by Karine Jean-Pierre and other people who right up to the very end were saying that videos of him where he appears to be out of it, you're imagining this, it's manipulated, it's that kind of thing, and yes, one of those videos was like clipped in a way that it looked bad, and there was something he was looking at, and it wasn't as bad as it looked. Fine, but the underlying reality was that people could see this man had very sadly and unfortunately declined in a way that happens to elderly Americans at when they hit different actual age landmarks. Some people can be still functioning and working past the age that Biden is. There are people in Congress older than him, like Bernie Sanders, for instance, who, while I disagree with all of his policies, I don't think has declined cognitively or physically or any way. But it just happens to people at different stages of their life. It clearly happened to Joe Biden. It's sad that it has, but it's also sad then to force him, strain him through this gauntlet that he's not prepared to do at a time where the world is really spiraling out of control. We need someone who has their finger on the pulse at all hours of the day, who can be roused in the middle of the night if for a Russian offensive against Ukraine or for news of bombs flying in the Middle East. It's just not. It doesn't seem correct for American stability to have someone who is so out of it, and that's ultimately what the American people decided.
And the key lesson to be learned here too is that politics. I describe it as like a living organism, and every action often has an equal and opposite reaction. And so when the Democrats are kind of subverting the will of the people and subverting the real ability to choose their candidate, that angers people. Mm-hmm. And that anger gets expressed in other ways, and people are repelled from that kind of dynamic. And, there were populist Democratic voters who actually started supporting RFK Jr. around that time. And maybe with RFK Jr.'s endorsement of Trump, a few more went in that direction. But the point being that people don't want the elites to be telling them what to do and what to think and making choices for them. This is a democracy, and it should be a bottom-up process.
So you've been a Democratic political candidate. Where do you see the party going? Do you think they're learning the right lessons from this defeat? I think, frankly, some in the party are. I think some on the, not on MSNBC, they're not. It's all because we're all too racist and sexist to ever accept a Democratic leader like Kamala. But I am seeing from some Democrats a reckoning with maybe the party's cultural stances or perceived proximity to a really cultural progressivism having hurt them. Do you think the reckoning is happening and the party will be looking toward more promising leadership?
I would say the constructive reckoning is happening on maybe a third to a half of the Democratic leaders I've talked to, and then the other half is blaming voters and doing other things. But the truth is, this was such a sweeping victory for Donald Trump in terms of winning every swing state that it forces a reckoning regardless of what your reactions are. And I think what's likely going to happen over the next 4 years is you're going to have more energy towards insurgent candidates within the Democratic Party. And whether it's the names that you've heard more about, whether it's Josh Shapiro or Gretchen Whitmer, or some candidates that we've never heard about. And by the way, we were just talking about Andrew Yang. Is he going to potentially run as a primary candidate on the Democratic side? So I just think in a moment like this, similar to 2004, where Republicans had resounding victories, that caused Democrats to really kind of reassess where they're at, listen to voices they may not have otherwise listened to, and new leaders emerged, and that ultimately led to the election of Barack Obama.
Andrew Yang did almost win that New York mayoral race. There are probably some New Yorkers who wish he had eked that one out, given what's happening with the current New York mayor. We will definitely pay attention to Andrew Yang and Dean Phillips. Maybe there is a future for him, given that he was a little bit of a Cassandra on the Joe Biden fitness issue. Lots more to get into on Rising Today. Please stay with us. Thanks so much. Oh no, the mainstream media has been in turmoil since the re-election of Donald Trump. Shakeups are already underway as newsrooms grapple how to deal with a landslide loss to MAGA world. CNN announced mass layoffs earlier this week, and MSNBC viewership precipitously plunged following Trump's victory. According to reports, its primetime rating plummeted 54%. And speaking of MSNBC, conservatives are skewering the network for staying mum about Al Sharpton accepting $500,000 from the Harris campaign ahead of a softball interview he did with then-candidate Harris. So one critic posted, "Aren't political campaigns supposed to get donations, not the other way around?" And ABC executives are also quipping with how to move forward in the changing environment. Per reports, they're in, quote, panic mode as they try to manage the current ultra-left, or rather anti-Trump rhetoric on the network. Remember this?
He's now the president. I'm still not going to say his name. That's not going to change.
Meanwhile, the Los Angeles Times fired the entire editorial board Thursday. Owner Dr. Patrick Soon-Shiong signaled a desire to overhaul the outlet's very left slant. Days before the gutting, he dropped a hint Sunday, posting on X, quote, "When the president has won the vote of the majority of Americans, then all voices must be heard. Opinions are just that. I will work towards making our paper and media fair and balanced so that all voices are heard and we can respectfully exchange every American's view, from left to right to the center. Coming soon, a new editorial board. Trust in media is critical for a strong democracy.
And on Tuesday, he told CNN, quote, "The current board of opinion writers veered very left, which is fine, but I think in order to have balance, you also need to have somebody who would trend right, and more importantly, somebody that would trend in the middle." So lots of self-reckonings happening in the media, lots of layoffs coming at CNN. What I think is very interesting about this is that people have to remember, back in 2016, Donald Trump, despite the media hating him, was good for the bottom line. For the mainstream media, Donald Trump was a gift, a boon. He massively, the coverage of Trump massively inflated the viewers' numbers for CNN and MSNBC. It was good for newspaper subscriptions. It was good for the New York Times, good for mainstream legacy media organizations. They sold, they profited on, you know, Trump is the worst thing ever, and we're going to explain to you why, and come to us, and here's where you can find a community of people who are just as freaked out about Trump as you are. And so it was very good for them. This time around, there's no evidence so far that's going to be the case. That could always change. And during the campaign, I was like, yeah, well, this will be a win for the media if it's Trump coming back. That does not seem to be happening. I think people are, it's like a boy who cried wolf problem a little bit, which is not to say there are no problems with Trump or I'm in favor of everything he does. But I think the absolute fear-mongering that the media engaged in is no longer persuasive to people, or even people who think Trump is the worst thing ever. They're not like, well, we subscribed to you, we listened to you for years, that didn't help do anything. I think there's a more, it's a demoralizing process that has happened among the most anti-Trump people. I don't think they're likely to resubscribe. In fact, they're unsubscribing because they think these media organizations are now compromised by billionaire owners who are making deals with Trump, like Jeff Bezos.
Right. This issue goes deeper than political party affiliation or political ideology. It gets to trust, because the basic story that a lot of mainstream media outlets pushed leading up to the election just turned out to be wrong. And how many times can it be wrong before viewers start tuning away? One thing I've noticed is just the concentration of reporters and media outlets geographically and certainly politically in other ways leads to a groupthink, and I think a dynamic where they just get out of touch with the American people. We were talking about The View and ABC. I would love to see a show like The View relocate to the Midwest, and I'm actually pretty serious about that. Like, you know, the Oprah Winfrey Show was based in Chicago for many years, and the thing that would happen if you relocate some of these shows to the Midwest is that, one, it's a forcing function for the hosts. Some will actually move out there and others won't. But for the people who do go on those shows, their perspective will be further rounded out based on the communities that they're living in. And I can say, as a Wisconsinite, as a Midwesterner, a lot of these shows are just out of touch with conversations happening in the Midwest and a lot of other parts of the country. And so this reckoning is long needed. These media outlets will have to reinvent their models, or independent media, the Joe Rogans of the world, are going to be an even bigger player. And as Andrew Yang and others are saying, in this next presidential cycle leading into 2028, there's going to be sort of the Joe Rogan interview that will be a major influence on how voters view these candidates.
I really appreciate that point. I agree with it. People are looking for more diverse sources of information. They have become less trustful in these major mainstream media organizations. There is a ignoring of what's going on in the vast middle of the country. I'm a fellow Midwesterner. I'm from the great state of Michigan, and the Midwest actually has become the most important place in terms of picking the president because of the unique level of influence that Pennsylvania, Michigan, and Wisconsin have over the system. Populous states that are very evenly divided politically become so important for the contest, the presidential contest. I mean, I think it's gotten better than like 2016, where Hillary Clinton didn't even bother to visit the Midwest very much. There was such a ignoring what's really going on to that level. I think that has decreased, at least on the Democratic side. But you're right that, you know, we get too much of our news, too much of our analysis from coastal elites. Well, you know, what am I going to say?
And part of the dynamic there, of course, like, coastal elites are human beings too, so there's nothing wrong with that. But part of the problem is you get these caricatures of different audiences that you're trying to speak to. So for example, on like an MSNBC, for example, you have the elite Democratic perspective, and then you have the never Trump Republican perspective. On CNN, they'll often have the MAGA perspective. That's just not how most people are. People are more nuanced than that. And I think there's a perspective emerging that's none of those three things, by the way. And if you don't speak to that, if you don't give voice to someone who maybe is critical of the Trump insurrection, who thought some of these Liz Cheney, never Trump Republicans turned out to be as big of political hacks as some of the elite Democrats are, well, you know, a lot of people are in that space who would agree with all three of those statements. And these media outlets aren't providing voice to that because they're not aware that those voices are out there.
Yeah, there's been an over-reliance, I would say, on the never Trump perspective in mainstream media. Those people, never Trump Republican, those people do exist. I have some of those people in my own family. I think that's a fine perspective to platform some of the time. But they platformed that perspective for a while so much on CNN and MSNBC in particular that I think it may give viewers a false impression that, like, most Republicans, or most people who say they're Republicans, hate Trump and think he's the worst. Which that applies to a small, they exist, but a small and smaller number of people. So if that's the only conservative perspective you have on the show, or the only alternative perspective you have, you were not doing your viewers, I think, a lot of credit.
Yeah, exactly. And what that dynamic also speaks to is those are all largely elite-style voices. That's part of the broader realignment of the parties that's happening right now.
Right.
And so what's the space missing? Who's speaking to populist voters right now? And there's a good reason why RFK Jr. spent a lot of time going on podcasts, because that's where younger populist voters are.
Yeah, there are voters out there who voted for Obama twice, and then for Trump, and then for Biden, and then we're going to vote for RFK Jr. if he's remained on the ballot. There are lots of people out there like that. And they make no sense to mainstream media people, but talk to them. Find out why they feel that way, why they feel like the country has abandoned them or their leadership has not been for them, why they have been happy to switch parties or do split ticket voting, do all of that. It's something that doesn't make sense to the elites, but it's out there.
I can think of specific voters in western Wisconsin who are farmers, who are exactly that profile. They've been voting for change for a long time. And this core tension, the feeling that your voice is not being heard in the political system, is part of the reason why Barack Obama could defeat Hillary Clinton in that 2008 primary, the reason why Bernie Sanders gained so much traction in 2016, and why Trump has obviously been a major force over the last decade. This past election was a change election. 3 out of 4 Americans were unhappy with the direction of our country. And we have to structurally change how we do politics. We need to, for example, end the legalized bribery that's happening in Congress. Those are the kind of issues that populist voters want to hear from. And those western Wisconsin farmers who voted in the way that you're describing are looking for that.
Coming up next on Rising, AOC had some very harsh things to say about Tulsi Gabbard on MSNBC. We're going to watch and react to that. Stay with us. New York Congressman Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez is upset at Donald Trump for picking Tulsi Gabbard to be the next director of national intelligence. Let's take a look.
And we haven't even gotten to Tulsi Gabbard potentially having access to national security information. And Russia loves it, loves her.
And I actually think almost more than Matt Gaetz, Tulsi Gabbard's appointment is devastating. And Tulsi Gabbard's nomination, as much as she says that she's an anti-war person, she's not.
Yeah.
She supports very pro-war individuals.
Including
abroad.
in Syria.
And let's be very clear, a Tulsi Gabbard nomination is a pro-war nomination globally. Point blank, period.
As is Donald Trump as president of the United States.
One staunch Trump supporter slammed AOC on X, writing, "Dear Sandy, AOC, are you high on something? Tulsi Gabbard is the most anti-Endless Wars nominee for Director of National Intelligence in years. That's why the Uniparty hates her." So I was a little surprised to see this level of anti-Tulsi opprobrium from AOC, because I would have thought AOC, as a self-described anti-war progressive left person, would have had a similar foreign policy outlook to Tulsi, who also comes out of progressive Bernie Sanders-style policies. Now she's a card-carrying member of the Republican Party. I think she's changed her views on maybe economic issues, other things. I don't really think she's changed her foreign policy views that AOC there is describing as pro-war. Frankly, I don't think Joy Reid understands what Tulsi's views are, so I don't take her misunderstanding that very seriously. But I think AOC should know that, and that Syria line, Tulsi, I disagree, I think, on things Tulsi has said about Bashar al-Assad. I have no doubt that Bashar al-Assad is a monster who has gassed and murdered his own people. I still do not think the U.S. should become involved in yet another conflict in the Middle East. I don't think the American people has any appetite whatsoever to involve the U.S. in Syria. So that is an anti-war stance that I share with Tulsi, and I think most Americans do, and I thought progressive Democrats do, but maybe something has changed where like progressive in Democratic circles means it means pro-intervention. I don't know what it means. Maybe you can shed some light on this for me.
Well, it's popular on MSNBC to undermine Tulsi Gabbard and call her a warmonger. When I worked pretty closely with Tulsi in the first couple years that when she was on Capitol Hill. She's always been very anti-war. She talked about ending regime change wars as she got more known nationally, and when she endorsed Bernie Sanders in 2016, it was on those grounds. And so I think it's hard to spin this as she is pro-war. I strongly disagree with Tulsi Gabbard's approach with Assad and the way that she met with him in Syria. It was done without proper congressional approvals. She did it kind of on her own with an independent nonprofit. That's just not how you should be conducting foreign policy as a sitting member of Congress. So she's made mistakes, absolutely. But at the same time, you can't say she's pro-war. Her main issue has been trying to mitigate armed conflicts, and in particular, what she calls regime change wars.
Yeah, exactly. And then they call her pro-Russia, or that she's they're literally describing her as if she's a Manchurian figure, as if she's a Russian asset. This is such a lazy and reckless smear. If you disagree with her, that's fine. Again, I'm sure there are aspects of foreign policy where I don't share her views, including on Assad's character himself, although I agree that we should not... the American people don't want intervention here. We didn't make Libya any better. We didn't make Iraq better. We got rid of Afghanistan after humiliating death for our own people. I don't think we should, back Israel to the utter end of all times. As they increasingly escalate tensions with their neighbors, I support them rooting out the terrorist organization that attacked them, but I don't know that the U.S. has to pay for it. The American people want to be less involved on these fronts. Ukraine is a very tough situation where Russia should not have invaded, and it's absolutely wrong. But before the entire country collapses or every last man, woman, and child is conscripted for this defensive effort, we need to find a peaceful resolution. I hope Tulsi can be a voice for those things. She has been in the past. So I really am surprised that she is generating the highest level of anger. AOC said she dislikes that pick more than Matt Gaetz. Wow. A lot of that is not even the prevailing view among Republicans. Republicans, many of whom are signaling opposition to the Matt Gaetz nomination based on some of the personal ethical issues he's had. Now, I happen to agree with that those ethical issues are serious and perhaps disqualifying, although I have to say I like some of the things he would do as Attorney General better. He's for drug legalization. He's anti-surveillance. He wants to pardon Snowden. So leftists were actually kind of excited about his candidacy. And if he gets tanked in favor of some other Republican, could be a deep state or surveillance type person on those issues, I think it would be a huge shame.
I encourage people to do a deep dive on Tulsi Gabbard over the last 10 years because you do see a little bit how, like Charlamagne Tha God, as we were talking about earlier, what happens when you look behind the curtain. Because what happened is Tulsi Gabbard challenged the establishment in 2016. She did not endorse Hillary Clinton. She endorsed Bernie Sanders. That's when the whole Russian asset thing started.
That's right.
Hillary called her that term. There's no evidence for that. And it's kind of, in Tulsi's perspective, she felt like that was pretty insulting as someone who's served our country and our military. But the bigger picture here is When I ran for Senate as a Democrat in Wisconsin, I ran as an anti-war Democrat, and that is very popular among the progressive populist wing of the Democratic Party. And so you don't want to get to a point, if you're a Democrat, to being seen where your party brand is one of foreign interventions, because that's out of step with a big part of the Democratic Party. I think both morally as well as politically, you want to be generally on the side of preventing armed conflicts. And there are different ways to do that, and a reasonable debate on the strength of your military, for example. That's the Reagan peace through strength idea. There are different ways to do that, but you don't want to be seen as the foreign interventionist party. That's a bad look for Democrats.
Yeah, and I would say the same thing to Republicans. I've said that to Republicans for years and years and years, that the neoconservative takeover of the party has been bad for both for global stability and the party's political fortunes. The American people, even on the right, don't want this. They signal time and time again that they are distrustful of the idea that America should police the world, that we should pay to make everyone else safer, that actually works, that doesn't make anyone safer, in fact. And Trump seems like he understands that maybe sometimes, but also his personnel decision-making just has to do with who he thought looked good on TV. Like, quite literally, in the case of the most recent administration, it's a lot of people who've said things, done well on conservative media. But I'm worried about, for instance, a Marco Rubio is, I think, very much out of a neoconservative playbook. I'm not sure about Pete Hegseth, the defense secretary nominee. I've met him a few times on Fox News. I'm interested to see what that pick means for defense. I hope it doesn't mean more military intervention. We'll find out. And then Tulsi is, I think, a strong pick in the other direction. So maybe it's about a cabinet of rivals type thing, but we'll find out.
Maybe, but I do think this concern about having neocons in the Trump administration is going to be a major problem potentially for Donald Trump. We saw that in the last administration when he chose John Bolton as his national security advisor. You could not have a more foreign interventionist guy than him, a guy who's been on the front lines of some of our worst foreign policy decisions. And so I think for Trump to really fulfill the hopes of a lot of people in the MAGA base, he should not be going so neocon, I think, on some of these appointments. And the net result, and you might see this with Marco Rubio, is eventually they're just going to diverge on opinions on what should be done, and then Marco Rubio will be added to the dustbin of all the former Trump appointees who then write books opposing Trump because they don't like him anymore.
I think that is a very wise prediction. Maybe we can hasten the day that happens and just get it over with. Lots more to come on Rising today. Eva Longoria and other celebrities, are they fleeing the country because Trump was elected? Do they hate America? We'll discuss. Stay tuned. Since the election, left-leaning Americans' interest in moving overseas appears to be skyrocketing. There's been an uptick in articles about how to move overseas, which countries are the most welcoming, etc. Now it appears some celebrities are actually following through on the desire to go into exile.
Last week, actress and film producer Eva Longoria, best known for her roles in Desperate Housewives and The Young and the Restless, became the first to publicly flee the U.S. because Donald Trump won a second term. She's now calling the USA a dystopian country. Longoria told Marie Claire in an interview 2 days after the election, "The shocking part is not that he won, it's that a convicted criminal who spews so much hate could hold the highest office." She added, "I get to escape and go somewhere. Most Americans aren't so lucky. They're going to be stuck in this dystopian country, and my anxiety and sadness is for them."
Poor Eva. Social media is having a field day, the prospect of privileged celebrities fleeing the country. Matt Walsh says, "Oh no, oh God, I never would have supported Trump if I knew it would lead to this. How can we go on without Eva Longoria? What is the point anymore? Don't leave us, Eva. No!"
Another user saying Eva Longoria announced that her family has left the country because Trump won. This would be a great time for Elon to add a button called "Who Gives AF?" Other celebs like Cher and Barbara Streisand have threatened in the past they would leave if Trump was reelected. But will they? Who else will jump on this bandwagon?
So to be, fair about this, Eva Longoria already owned property elsewhere and travels in the summers or whenever to
Spain, I think, right?
To Spain. So it's not, she didn't literally decide, oh my God, Trump is president, I need to go buy a house somewhere else. She said in that interview, she has for a long time felt like this country is not hers anymore, is not comfortable for people like her. I have no doubt there will be more celebrities looking for palaces elsewhere in the world, maybe places where the taxes are even friendlier to the wealthy and the elite and the rich. There's always that, which I don't care about. It's fine, good. I want to headquarters somewhere where my taxes will be as low as possible too. But this kind of this does rub people the wrong way. This kind of anti-Americanism. Ordinary people love this country. And I don't think they like to hear celebrities disrespecting it, independent of who the political leadership is. The country is not the president. The country is not the party in charge, and so on. And I think it's a mistake to view it that way.
Yeah, in fact, I actually felt one of the good things that Kamala Harris and her campaign did early on was wrapping themselves in the American flag at the DNC, very patriotic speeches. That's a nice shift for the Democratic Party. However, you hear celebrities say, every 4 years the candidate that's not their choice, if they win, that they're going to move away. I just think we're lucky to live in a country right now where more people want to live here than want to leave. And if some people find that their living circumstances are better elsewhere, there's no problem with that. But I do feel like this dynamic is similar to when Elon first purchased X. You had so many people declaring that they're leaving X and posting their soliloquies on why they're leaving, only to return.
Yeah, I so agree with that. I'll believe it when I see it. Now, people are doing that right now. There's Blue Sky. I think that's the major competitor. Yeah. It's not, Threads is not really working out. I don't think Threads is just for corporate PR propaganda or something. I do know some people going to Blue Sky, and I've seen people doing the dramatic "I quit." I think Joy Reid just did that this week.
Yeah.
Like you, I suspect we'll see them back on Twitter X in the fullness of time. Nobody. It's a great Rick and Morty joke that he did the equivalent of quitting Twitter. Nobody ever quits Twitter. They'll be back. They'll be back.
Yeah. I mean, for that, the good thing about how this market works currently is the best product will win. And so if there's a better product, people will move to that. But as of now, people are, largely, after leaving X, returning to it. And I think the same principle applies for America. It's a great thing right now, and that's why a lot of people want to move here. I have a lot of friends internationally who would like to move here, and they really struggle to get visas and really struggle to be able to stay here after they, say, go to college here. They want to stay here, they want to create jobs, and then they're kicked out and go back home. So I just think right now, America is a place that's attracting a lot of people. We'll see where we're at, maybe 10 years from now, maybe it'll be a different dynamic. But I'm really proud to be living in this country, and I don't plan to leave it anytime soon.
Me neither. I do want to make it easier for people to come to America legally, to work here, to contribute. To grow the culture, expand the horizons of what the U.S. is capable of. I'm a futurist, a pro-technology person. I want us to build skyscrapers and rockets. I want us to colonize Mars. I hope Elon doesn't get too distracted being the shadow president of the United States. He's got to stay on task, and that task is making us a multiplanetary species. And immigrants are part of that. The frustration obviously has been with illegal immigration and people streaming across the border. And I hope that with control of all three branches of government, Republicans and Democrats can work together to make it easier for people who want to come here, learn, work, and then stay, not get sent back. That's the stupidest thing we do of all. People come here, get educated in our schools, and then we send them back to China? Why? Why would we do that? It's so stupid. Trump knows it's stupid. He said that's stupid. He said, if you get an advanced degree, can we make it so you'll actually stay here? Can we mail out those green cards, please? So I really hope they do something smart on immigration. Yes, border security. Yes, making the lives of people who live in border towns easier. Yes, we don't want to have to strain our social services to provide free housing for people coming in disorderly fashion, but we do want to take in people who are going to work here and help make the country great.
Yeah, in terms of securing the border and providing an enhancement to the legal immigration system, I feel like an underreported story in this cycle was that Kamala Harris and Donald Trump had more aligned views on immigration than you would think. There are definitely some differences too, but Kamala Harris was embracing the bipartisan immigration bill that included a lot of Republican ideas. Just going back to this Eva Longoria story, I know this is kind of a fun story, but one serious note on this is, if you look at history and you look at things like the Berlin Wall or North Korea, there have been real situations where people cannot leave the country in which they're living in, that they try desperately at risk of their lives to leave. And we're very fortunate to live in a place where if you truly do want to leave, you can.
Amen to that. Well, that does it for us today on Rising. Stephen, it was wonderful having you here.
Thank you for having me.
This was so much fun. We'll make sure to have you back. We really enjoyed this. Tell us what you think about the show in the comments. I always read them. And be sure to like, share, and subscribe so you never miss any content. And for those of you who like to listen while on the go, we're now available anywhere you can find podcasts. It's been my pleasure to fill in on a Friday. I'm going to go enjoy my weekend now. Hope you do the same. Bye-bye.